I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me, and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing.
Well, the election season is upon us. Are you tired of it yet? For some people, all the fuss and fury and infighting makes them anxious or angry or upset. But many more are simply exhausted by the polarization. One recent study found that 93% of Americans say they're tired of how divided our nation has become and worried about our future because of the division. The study coined the term the exhausted majority. And it's not just the political environment either. The Catholic Church in this country is more divided than I've ever experienced in my lifetime. In past decades, bishops in this country, who certainly held differing views from time to time, disagreed privately but publicly professed their unity. And they always stood with the Pope. That is not always the case any longer. And don't even get me started about pastors speaking openly against other pastors. It's almost unavoidable in clerical circles. Among the laity, you've got intense traditionalists on the far right who want a complete return to the traditional Latin Mass, and those on the far left who very casually talk about abandoning much of our Catholic culture and tradition. In fact, there's a spirit of division that seems to be sweeping through our age, and it finds its way into our workplaces, our schools, our social gatherings, even our family gatherings, or perhaps I should say, especially our family gatherings. We can feel it, we can sense it, we can see it. We instinctively know it's a problem that must be addressed for our personal health, for the health and happiness of our families, for the cohesion of our communities, for the good of our country, and for the unity of the church. It must be addressed because Jesus said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." And yet, we feel so helpless in the face of it all, leading me, for one, to keep my head down and my opinions largely to myself. The goal of this series is to find a better way forward. The goal is to strengthen all of us in our resolve to work against the disunity and division that we experience every single day, nearly everywhere we go. And today, we'll look at a first step that we can easily take. But before taking that step, I want to offer a couple of caveats and dig a little deeper into the diagnosis of the problem, because the problem is often misunderstood. Here's the first caveat. Unity does not mean agreement. Unity does not mean agreement. Working for greater unity does not mean you agree with me and I agree with you. It does not mean that you have to agree with everyone on everything. It does not mean denying what we know to be true. It's not milquetoast moderation. It's not watering down of ideas. There's a common fallacy out there that if we all just move to the middle, then we would all get along and all would be good. The question is, the middle of what? Our faith teaches us that there is objective truth. Our faith also teaches us that we dare not compromise on that truth. So if you're hesitant or resisting this topic, this message, because you think it means compromising your convictions, let me assure you, that is not where we are going. That is not what we're talking about. So relax. The second caveat, unity does not mean simply tolerance or civility. Unity does not mean simply tolerance or civility. Although Tolerance and civility are great values that we should always aspire to express, and we could use a lot more of for sure. But tolerance and civility don't go deep enough. They're superficial. Aiming at unity means building authentic relationships based in real respect. Our ideal for unity is the Trinity. One God, three divine persons. Of course, they love one another, but the Trinity also do something else together. They collaborate. Collaborate. That's a Latin word, collaborare. The Trinity works together. They collaborate together to create, sustain, and redeem creation. Our desire for unity is a reflection of the truth of the Trinity deep down in us. We desire unity because the source of our very being, the source of life itself, is unified. It's one. Now, here comes the deeper diagnosis of the problem. And I owe much of this reflection to Arthur Brooks' recent best-selling book, Love Your Enemy. If you're interested in going deeper in this topic, I highly recommend this book. Brooks contends the cause of our division is not disagreement over policies and politics. It's not even a political problem. It's a cultural problem. He names ours a culture of contempt. Contempt is also a Latin word, contemptus, with scorn. Contempt is the opposite of collaboration. Collaboration values the other, at least at some level. They are valued as worthwhile. Contempt disparages the other at every level. They are judged worthless. Jesus himself talks about contempt in his Sermon on the Mount. There he said this, I say to you, whoever is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment, but whoever says to his brother, Raka, will be answerable to the Sanhedrin. What does that mean? Well, Raka was a Hebrew word that, when properly pronounced, made a spitting sound as you said it. It would be like hearing someone's name and spitting at the sound of their name. It's a perfect image for contempt. And notice, too, the distinction Jesus makes between anger and raka, between anger and contempt. Anger, however unpleasant or unattractive it might be, anger attempts to engage the other person. Contempt rejects the other person. So over the course of this series, we're taking a look at overcoming the culture of contempt and embracing and building a culture of collaboration. We'll start today by using the rest of our time together to briefly look at a passage from the Gospel of Mark. And it goes like this. Again, Jesus left the district of Tyre and went by way of Sidon to the Sea of Galilee to the district called the Decapolis. In this verse, a certain district is named the Decapolis, the 10 cities, which means nothing to most of us. But they're not insignificant to our discussion this morning. They were Gentile communities. In other words, communities of people who were not Jewish. And here's the thing. The Jewish leaders and teachers and rabbis did not go to Gentile communities. They did not go there. In fact, it would be somewhat scandalous for them to travel there, much less to interact with the Gentile people themselves. The word Pharisee means one set apart. The Jewish leaders sought to be set apart from the Gentiles, whom they considered unfit and unclean. They did this as a way of living a pure form of religion, which they believed would bring them closer to God. Therefore, the Jewish leaders wanted nothing to do with the Gentiles. They held them in contempt. By going to these communities, Jesus was disavowing their contempt. We see him over and over and over again breaking down walls of division and disunity wherever possible, precisely in this instance by traveling to these towns. Here's another important piece of information about the Decapolis. It wasn't Jesus' first visit. Earlier, Jesus had gone there and healed a man possessed by a demon. And on that occasion, when the townspeople saw this display of power, they begged him to leave. It frightened them. They didn't know what to make of him. And despite that reaction, Jesus goes back. He doesn't allow their initial reaction to keep him from his ministry to preach the good news. He doesn't allow their rejection to drive his behavior. When it comes to building unity, we can't allow others' reaction to determine our actions. So Jesus goes back to the Decapolis, and this time things have changed because they've changed. The people have changed because the man who had been healed told them about Jesus, who he really was, and what he had really done. By healing that man, Jesus had won a friend in that area of the world, so this time he gets a different greeting. The people brought to him a deaf man who had a speech impediment and begged him to lay hands on him. They bring him a deaf man who cannot speak, and they beg him to heal the man. As an aside, we see in this instance the importance of bringing people to the Lord for healing, for help, for wholeness. Everyone needs the Lord, but not everyone knows how to approach him. Sometimes we ourselves don't know how to approach him. That's why everyone needs friends in faith. Anyway, this unnamed crowd intercedes for the blind man, and Jesus responds positively. Mark describes in specific detail exactly how Jesus proceeded to heal him. And by the way, Jesus didn't always heal the same way. Sometimes he just spoke, and his words had healing effect. Sometimes he laid hands on people. One time, he healed a blind man with the application of mud on his eyes. These different methods of healing show us that Jesus treats each person uniquely, distinctly, differently. That his healing is not a magic formula, it's the fruit of the relationship. In this instance, Mark describes 7 steps that Jesus took to heal the blind man. First step, he took him off by himself away from the crowd. Why? Well, probably to honor the dignity of the deaf man by giving him some privacy in this very intimate, this very private moment. Perhaps, too, he wanted the experience of the miracle to be a spiritual experience leading to conversion, and not just a spectacle to entertain the crowd. Second, he put his finger into the man's ears. He immediately makes this very tactile, a very physical experience for a very physical hearing. Touching his ear also helped the man who couldn't hear what was going on understand what was going on. Third and fourth steps, spitting, he touched his tongue. It wasn't just the man's ears that needed healing. He developed a speech impediment as a result of his hearing loss, so his speech had to be restored. The saliva was thought to have therapeutic qualities. Fifth, he looked up to heaven. This is his prayer for the man. Jesus' power to heal came from his authority and intimacy he enjoyed with his heavenly Father. Sixth step, he groaned. The groan is a reflection of the depth of his prayer. It's also a recognition of the ravages of sin that are ultimately responsible for the disorder and the disability in creation. He groaned because he knew so much more healing was needed in the world. He groaned because he knew so much more reconciliation is needed in the world. The heaviness of the divided world burdened him, and so he groaned. Seventh step, he said, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And immediately the man's ears were opened, his speech was improved, and he spoke plainly. Jesus commands the man's ears to be open, and he's healed instantly. He can heal, and in turn, that allows him to speak clearly, and in turn, that allows him to regain his place in the community, to be restored to society. Building a culture of collaboration is, in no small part, all about our ability to listen thoughtfully and to speak thoughtfully. First and foremost, we must be open to really listening to and learning from God. God doesn't want a spirit of division tearing our country and culture apart, and He certainly doesn't want a spirit of division in the church either. God is one, and His church especially is meant to reflect that unity. The problem of disunity in our world cannot be solved by human solutions. Let me say that again. The problem of disunity in our world today cannot be solved by human solutions. The answer to how to solve the divisions we experience will not be found without listening to God's wisdom and God's counsel. That means we need to take this to prayer. Imagine if every Christian in this country this fall simply asked the Lord for wisdom on how to contribute to a culture of collaboration. Imagine what that would look like. But of course, in addition to listening to the Lord, we need to be open to truly listening to one another. Again, this doesn't mean we have to agree. But if the culture of contempt is what causes so much disunity, then truly listening to others has the potential to at least diminish it. Perhaps to get this series started, I could offer a simple challenge today. We have on display in the Vision Cafe a prayer tree. Right now, a rather barren prayer tree. Can I invite you after Mass today, or sometime, anytime during the course of this series, to include the name of someone, just one someone you know who you need to build collaboration with this fall. Just write their first name, just first names only. Just their first name on one of our leaves, their fabric strips. And our host ministers will help you attach your leaf to the tree. And then we'll pray for those names specifically. We'll pray for them, we'll pray for you during the course of this series. You know, sometimes building a bridge to a group that stands divided from us can happen simply by simply winning over a single person. That's a place to start.